The year is 399 BC. In a large open-air court in the city of Athens, 501 men are seated in tiered rows, waiting. They are jurors, chosen by lot that morning from the citizen rolls, ordinary men, farmers and merchants and craftsmen and retired soldiers, holding the small bronze tokens that mark their participation in the most important trial Athens has conducted in living memory. At the center of the court stands a single man. He is 70 years old. He is short and stocky, with a broad, flat nose that his contemporaries compared to a satyr's, bulging eyes that miss nothing, thick lips, and a gray beard that has never been particularly well maintained. He is wearing a simple worn cloak. His feet are bare. They are always bare, in every season, a detail that Athens has remarked upon for 40 years, without ever quite getting used to it. He does not look like a man on trial for his life. He looks like a man who has somewhere interesting to be and is mildly curious about how long this will take. His name is Socrates. And what happens in this courtroom today will echo for 2,500 years, will shape the way every philosopher after him thinks about truth, about courage, about what it means to live a life worth living. But to understand this moment, to feel the full weight of what is about to happen, we have to go back through 40 years of bare feet on marble streets, back to a boy in a stonemason's workshop, watching his father shape stone, beginning to wonder about the shape of things that cannot be touched. Socrates was born around 470 BC in Athens, to a father named Sophroniskis who carved stone and a mother named Phaedo who was a midwife. He grew up in the demi of Alapis, a neighborhood of craftsmen and working families not far from the agora. His childhood was unremarkable by every external measure. He learned his father's trade. He learned to read. He served in the military as every Athenian male citizen was required to do. But something was already different about the way he moved through the world. He noticed things, not in the way a poet notices, reaching for beauty, for the image that captures feeling. He noticed contradictions, the gap between what people said and what they actually meant, the distance between the confidence with which a man stated his beliefs and the actual foundation those beliefs rested on. He would sit with a thought for hours, turning it slowly, examining it from every angle, the way his father turned a block of marble, before deciding where to place the chisel. Most people, he noticed, did not do this. Most people held their beliefs the way they held inherited property, without ever checking whether it was actually theirs, without ever asking whether the foundations were sound. This bothered him more than it should have. Perhaps more than was comfortable for anyone around him. The turning point came from an unlikely source. The oracle at Delphi. Socrates' friend Xenophon, in a moment of either genuine curiosity or mild provocation, traveled to the sanctuary at Delphi and asked the oracle, the priestess of Apollo whose pronouncements were considered the closest thing to divine speech available to mortals, whether any man was wiser than Socrates. The oracle said no. When Xenophon brought this answer back to Athens, Socrates found it deeply puzzling. Not flattering. Puzzling. Because he was quite certain he was not wise. He was aware, with unusual clarity, of the vast extent of what he did not know. The oracle's answer made no sense to him. But the oracle was Apollo's voice. It could not simply be wrong. So Socrates did what Socrates always did when confronted with a contradiction he could not resolve. He investigated. He went looking for someone wiser than himself, so he could point to that person and tell the god, there, that one, you made a mistake. He went first to the politicians. Athens had no shortage of men who were widely considered wise. Experienced statesmen, successful generals, men whose careers suggested a deep understanding of human affairs. Socrates sat with them and talked. He asked them questions, simple, direct, apparently naive questions about the things they claimed expertise in. What is justice? What makes a good law? What is the proper goal of governance? The politicians answered with confidence. Socrates asked follow-up questions. The confidence began to develop cracks. He pushed further. The cracks widened. By the end of the conversation, the man who had entered it believing himself expert had been walked step by careful step to the edge of his own ignorance and left there, staring into it. They did not thank him for this. He went to the poets. Athens revered its poets. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides had written works of such power that they were performed before audiences of 15,000 and quoted from memory by generals before battles. Surely these men, who produced such profound insights into the human condition, possessed genuine wisdom. Socrates asked them to explain their own poems, to tell him what they meant, to walk him through the thinking behind the lines that moved audiences to tears. They could not do it. They became confused, then defensive, then angry. Their poems, it emerged, came to them through inspiration, through some process they did not understand and could not explain. They were vessels, not architects. They produced wisdom without possessing it. He went to the craftsman. Here, at least, he found genuine knowledge. A cobbler knew leather, a blacksmith knew iron, a carpenter knew wood with the intimate, practical, tested knowledge of a lifetime's work. Socrates respected this. He said, so. But then the craftsmen made their mistake. They assumed that their expertise in their craft extended to other domains. The cobbler had opinions about military strategy. The blacksmith knew how the city should be governed. The carpenter understood the nature of the gods. They did not. And their confident wrongness in these areas, Socrates concluded, made them in some ways worse off than people who knew nothing, and knew that they knew nothing. After years of this investigation, Socrates arrived at his conclusion, the conclusion that would define everything that followed. The oracle was right. He was the wisest man in Athens, not because he knew more than anyone else, but because he was the only one who understood the shape of his own ignorance. He knew that he did not know. Everyone else thought they knew, and did not. This is wisdom, not the possession of answers, but the honest recognition of questions. It sounds simple. It is not simple. It is one of the hardest things a human mind can do, to sit with genuine uncertainty, to resist the comfort of false confidence, to keep asking when the easier thing, the more socially acceptable thing, would be to stop. Socrates never stopped. And Athens, for 40 years, mostly tolerated him, sometimes laughed at him, sometimes admired him, with a devotion that bordered on worship, but tolerated him, the ugly barefoot man in the agora, the irritant, the gadfly who stung the great horse of Athens into wakefulness when it preferred to sleep. Until it didn't. Until a city that had been through too much. Too many wars, too many dead, too many betrayals, too much loss, looked at the man asking questions, and decided that the questions themselves were the problem. That decision is still ahead of us. But it is coming. You can feel it in the air of Athens in the early 4th century BC, a tension, a tiredness, a grief that has nowhere to go. The old man in the marketplace keeps walking, keeps asking. His feet are always bare on the warm marble streets. He knows what's coming. He has known for a while. He asks his questions anyway. To understand why Athens turned on Socrates, you have to understand what Athens had become by 399 BC. Not the Athens of the Parthenon. Not the Athens of Marathon and Salamis, the city that had stood alone against the greatest empire in the world and won. That Athens was 30 years dead by the time Socrates stood in the courtroom. What remained in 399 BC was something smaller, something wounded, something that had looked at its own reflection in the last 3 decades and did not entirely like what it saw. The Peloponnesian War had done it. 27 years of fighting Sparta and its allies, from 431 to 404 BC, had drained Athens of everything the Persian Wars had given it. The money was gone. The empire was gone. The fleet that Themistocles had built, and that had saved Greece. At Salamis, gone, surrendered at the war's end. Dismantled under Spartan supervision. The long walls that had protected the city were torn down to the sound of Spartan flute music. The conquerors played instruments while the defeated tore down their own defenses, and if there is a more perfectly designed humiliation in ancient history, it does not come immediately to mind. But the military defeat, devastating as it was not the deepest wound. The deepest wound was self-inflicted. In 415 BC, 12 years before the war ended, Athens had made a decision of such spectacular, strategic stupidity that Thucydides, who was not given to emotional language, barely conceals his disbelief while recording it. The assembly voted to send its entire military fleet, 134 triremes, 5,000 soldiers, the full force of Athenian naval power, to conquer Sicily, a large island they had never seriously threatened before, governed by Syracuse, a city as large and well defended as Athens itself. The reasons given were flimsy. The strategic logic was almost non-existent. The mission was driven largely by the charisma of one man, Alcibiades. Brilliant, reckless, beautiful, a former companion of Socrates whose gifts were matched only by his complete absence of moral scruple, who convinced the assembly that Sicily was conquerable, and that its conquest would give Athens an empire powerful enough to defeat Sparta once and for all. The expedition was a catastrophe so complete that catastrophe barely covers it. The entire force was destroyed. Not defeated, destroyed. The soldiers, who were not killed in battle, were worked to death in Syracusan stone quarries. The fleet was burned in the harbor. Of the tens of thousands of Athenians and allies who sailed to Sicily, almost none came home. When the news arrived in Athens, the city went silent. Thucydides describes it. People could not believe it at first. Then, slowly, the truth arrived, and the silence became grief, and the grief became something harder and colder. The men who had voted for the expedition turned on the men who had proposed it. Alcibiades, who had been recalled to faced corruption charges before the battle and had defected to Sparta rather than return, became in Athenian memory the face of the betrayal. Alcibiades had been a companion of Socrates. This fact was noted, filed away, not yet used. The war ended in 404 BC with unconditional surrender. And then came the 30 tyrants, an oligarchic regime installed by Sparta, 30 men given absolute power over Athens, who used that power in 8 months to execute 1,500 Athenians, exile 5,000 more, and seize the property of anyone wealthy enough to be worth seizing from. The leader of the 30 was a man named Critias. Brilliant, cold, ruthless, he had written poetry and philosophy in his youth. He had moved in the intellectual circles of Athens. He had spent time with Socrates. This fact was also noted, filed away. The democracy was restored in 403 BC. The 30 were overthrown by a democratic resistance movement that fought its way back into Athens from exile and restored the assembly and the courts. There was an amnesty, a formal, legal forgetting of the crimes of the oligarchic period, designed to allow the city. It was politically necessary. It was also psychologically impossible. You cannot pass a law making people genuinely forget. The grief and the anger remained, looking for somewhere to go. The amnesty had sealed off the most direct outlets. You could not prosecute men for what they had done under the 30. So the anger moved sideways, looking for something it could legally reach. Into this atmosphere walked Socrates, as he had always walked, barefoot, asking questions. The questions had not changed, but the city had. A man named Meletus, a young poet, earnest and limited, genuinely convinced of his own righteousness, drafted a formal charge. He was joined by Anytus, a successful businessman and democratic politician, who had played a real role in restoring the democracy, and who appears to have believed with equal sincerity that Socrates represented a genuine threat to Athenian civic values, and by Lyco, about whom history remembers almost nothing, which is itself a kind of verdict. The charges were impiety, specifically failing to honor the gods the city honored, and introducing new divine beings, and corrupting the youth of Athens. Behind these formal charges was something that could not be formally charged under the amnesty: the association with Alcibiades and Critias. The 40 years of questions that had made powerful men feel foolish. The divine sign, the daimonion, the inner voice Socrates claimed to hear, which could be framed as an unauthorized new deity. The habit of making Athenian democracy's decision-making processes look philosophically incoherent. Socrates was 70 years old. He had survived the plague and 3 military campaigns and the 30 tyrants. He had defied the 30 directly, when ordered to participate in the arrest of an innocent man named Leon of Salamis. He had simply refused and gone home. A small, quiet act of moral courage that had cost him nothing at the time, because the 30 fell before they got around to punishing him for it. Now, in a democracy restored and wounded and frightened, 3 men were formally accusing him of crimes against the city. He was given the chance to prepare a defense. He had 30 days. His friends expected him to hire a professional speechwriter. This was standard practice, expected, entirely acceptable within Athenian legal culture. The orators of Athens were skilled at constructing defenses designed to move juries, appeals to emotion, to family, to past, service, to the mercy of reasonable men. Socrates prepared no such defense. He would speak as himself. He would say what he believed. He would not perform remorse he did not feel, or fear he did not experience, or humility before a process he did not respect. His friends were worried. His companions, the young men who had followed him through the agora for years, who had sat with him in gymnasia and at symposia, who had watched him dismantle the certainties of generals and poets and politicians. They were worried in the specific way that people worry when they love someone who is about to do something completely consistent with who they are, and completely likely to destroy them. Socrates was not worried. He had thought about death for a long time. He had thought about it the way he thought about everything, carefully, from multiple angles, without the comfort of pretending he knew more than he did. He did not know what death was. He did not know whether it was an ending or a transition or something that language did not have adequate tools to describe. But he knew what life was. He knew what his life had been. 40 years of questions, 40 years of the examined path, 40 years of refusing to pretend that comfortable ignorance was the same as wisdom. He was not going to stop now. The morning of the trial arrived. Athens woke as it always woke, the agora filling, the smoke of cook fires rising, the sound of the city beginning its daily noise. Somewhere in the city, 501 men were receiving their juror tokens and making their way to the court. And Socrates put on his worn cloak, left his feet bare, as always, walked through the streets of the city he had never left, not even when he could have, not even when leaving would have saved him, toward the court where Athens was about to decide what to do with the most honest man it had ever produced. The trial of Socrates is about to begin. And nothing, not the wars, not the plague, not the 30 tyrants, not the long catalogue of things Athens had done and survived and regretted. Nothing Athens ever did would follow it the way this day would follow it. Into every century after. Into every courtroom after. Into every moment when a person with power looks at a person with truth and has to decide what to do. The decision Athens made that morning is still being made. Every day. Everywhere. Walk with him now. Into the court. Into the light. He did not bring his sons to court. This was the first thing that the jury noticed. Not immediately, but later, in the way that an absence makes itself felt slowly, the way you become aware of a sound only when it stops. In Athenian courts, defendants facing serious charges routinely brought their families before the jury. Their wives, their children, their elderly mothers. They wept. They appealed to pity. They reminded 500 ordinary men that the person standing before them was not merely a case to be decided but a father, a husband, a son, someone whose death would leave real people with real grief. It worked. It was expected. It was, by the standards of Athenian legal culture, entirely acceptable. Socrates had 3 sons. The youngest was still a child. He had a wife. He had friends whose love for him was visible to anyone who had spent time in his company. He brought none of them. He stood alone in the center of the court, in his worn cloak and bare feet, and he began to speak in the only way he knew how to speak. Directly. Without the rhythms and ornaments of professional oratory, without the calculated, emotional beats that an experienced speechwriter would have built into a defense. He spoke the way he had always spoken in the agora. Like a man in conversation. Like a man who had a point to make and was going to make it. He told the jury he was going to tell them the truth. He asked them to judge him on whether what he said was just, not on whether it was eloquent, not on whether it moved them, not on whether it followed the conventions of Athenian courtroom rhetoric. The jury, by all accounts, was not immediately charmed by this. The charges against him had been read by Meletus, the young poet who had signed the indictment, who genuinely believed in what he was doing, with the particular dangerous sincerity of a limited man convinced of his own righteousness. The charges were formal and specific. Socrates was guilty of impiety, of failing to honor the gods the city honored, of introducing new divine beings, and of corrupting the youth of Athens. Behind Meletus sat Anytus, the real force behind the prosecution, a successful businessman, a democratic politician who had helped restore the democracy after the 30 tyrants, a man of genuine civic accomplishment who appears to have believed with complete sincerity that Socrates was dangerous. This is what made him formidable. He was not cynical. He was not using the charges as a political weapon while privately acknowledging their absurdity. He thought Socrates was genuinely bad for Athens, and he thought it for reasons that, if you examine them carefully, are not entirely without logic, even if the conclusion he reached from them was catastrophically wrong. Socrates began his defense. He addressed the old accusations first, the ones that had been circulating for decades, embedded now in the public imagination by Aristophanes' comedy The Clouds, which had put a figure clearly meant to be Socrates on stage as a charlatan who taught young men to make weak arguments defeat strong ones and who kept his head literally in the clouds. That image, the dangerous sophist, the corrupter, the man who undermined traditional values through clever argument, had been growing in Athenian consciousness since 423 BC, 24 years of slow accumulation. Socrates was not a sophist, he told the jury. The sophist charged fees. He charged nothing. The sophist claimed to teach wisdom. He claimed only to demonstrate ignorance. These were not minor distinctions. They were the entire difference between what the prosecution was describing and what he actually was. He explained the oracle. He told the jury about Chaerephon's question to the Delphic oracle and the oracle's answer, that no man was wiser than Socrates, and about his own response to that answer, his investigation. The politicians, the poets, the craftsmen, the discovery arrived at 3 years of honest inquiry that he was the wisest man in Athens only in the sense that he was the only one who knew the shape of his own ignorance. This investigation, he told the jury, was his divine mission. The god had assigned it to him. He had been the gadfly of Athens, the irritant that kept the great horse of the city from falling into the comfortable sleep of unexamined assumptions. Without him, Athens would grow fat and slow and certain of things it had no right to be certain of. Some members of the jury shifted in their seats. The metaphor of Athens as a horse and Socrates as its necessary irritant was not designed to win votes. It was designed to be accurate. Socrates was not trying to win. He was trying to tell the truth. These two goals in a courtroom are not always compatible. Then he turned to Meletus directly and did what he had been doing in the agora for 40 years. He asked questions. Simple questions. Apparently naive questions. Questions that seemed to have obvious answers. Until you tried to answer them. You accuse me of corrupting the youth, Socrates said. Tell me, who improves the youth? Meletus, caught slightly off guard, gestured toward the laws, the courts, the assembly. So everyone improves the youth, Socrates said. Everyone except me. Is that what you're saying? How remarkable. In every other area of expertise, we acknowledge that few people are genuinely skilled, that there are few good horse trainers, few excellent physicians, and that the many who are unskilled actually do harm to what they work with. But with the youth of Athens, you are saying that every single citizen improves them, and only I corrupt them. Meletus, trying to hold his position, said yes. That was what he was saying. Socrates nodded slowly. A man watching a man walk into a trap that the man was building for himself. He moved on. You say I introduce new divine beings, he said. But elsewhere you say I am an atheist, that I don't believe in gods at all. Can both of these things be true simultaneously? Can a man both disbelieve in gods and introduce new ones? Meletus tried to answer. The answer did not hold together. The jury watched the prosecutor being taken apart by the defendant using nothing but the simplest tools of logical consistency. The same tools Socrates had used on politicians and poets and craftsmen in the agora for 40 years. The same tools that had made him enemies for 40 years. The jury was not entirely won over by this, because what Socrates was doing in his defense was exactly what he had always done, and the problem, for many of the 501 men watching him, was not that he was wrong. It was that he was right, and being right in that particular way, with that particular fearless clarity, felt like an accusation. Felt like being back in the agora, 20 years ago, certain of something important, and having a barefoot ugly man asked you one question too many. He spoke of his divine sign, the daimonion, the inner voice that had guided and restrained him since childhood. He spoke of it with the same matter-of-fact certainty with which he spoke of everything, either dramatizing it nor defending it, simply describing it as a feature of his experience that was as real to him as the marble under his bare feet. He told them he could not stop. That even if they acquitted him today on the condition that he cease his philosophical activity, he would refuse. The God had assigned him to this work. Abandoning it would be disobeying a divine command. He owed the God this. He owed Athens this, whether Athens wanted it or not. He told them, with a quiet that was more disturbing than any dramatic delivery could have been, that he was not afraid of dying, that a man who feared death was claiming to know that death was an evil, claiming knowledge no one possessed. He did not have that knowledge. He would not pretend to. The jury voted 280 to 221 guilty. After a conviction in an Athenian court, both sides proposed a penalty, and the jury chose between them. The prosecution proposed death. This was not automatic. It was a choice, a deliberate escalation, a statement that the men who had brought this case considered Socrates not merely wrong but dangerous enough to remove permanently. It was, in the context of Athenian legal practice, an aggressive position. Many cases that resulted in conviction ended in fines, in exile, and loss of civic rights. Death was reserved for the most serious Offenses. Socrates was invited to propose an alternative. His friends had already discussed this with him. They had urged him, with the particular desperate urgency of people who love someone and cannot make them understand the danger they are in, to propose exile. Athens would accept exile. Many on the jury who had voted to convict would have been relieved to vote for exile, to resolve the problem of Socrates without his blood on their hands. He could go to Thebes, to Megara, to any of a dozen cities that would have welcomed him. He could continue his philosophical work. Outside Athens, he could live. Socrates considered this and rejected it. Exile, he explained with maddening patience, would mean going to another city and doing there what he did here, asking questions, investigating the claims of the wise. And in that other city, the young men would gather around him, and he would ask questions, and the prominent citizens would be annoyed, and they would expel him, and he would go to yet another city. It would be the same problem, in a different location, and he would be running from it, which was not something Socrates did. He could propose, alternatively, that he be forbidden from philosophical activity. This was also suggested to him. He gave it the same consideration and the same rejection. The unexamined life, he said, is not worth living. If the choice was between living without philosophy and not living at all, it was not a difficult choice. What Socrates proposed instead, and here something comes through the 2.5 millennia between his mouth and our ears that is not quite like anything else in ancient history. What he proposed was that he deserved free meals at the Prytaneum for the rest of his life. The Prytaneum was where Athens honored its greatest benefactors, Olympic champions, men who had rendered exceptional service to the city. They were given the honor of dining at public expense for life. Socrates told the jury that this was the appropriate reward for a man who had spent his life as their benefactor, who had neglected his own affairs and his family's financial well-being to serve Athens by keeping it honest. The court erupted. His friends, watching from the crowd, went pale. Plato, 28 years old, watching the man who had shaped everything he thought and would ever think, apparently tried to speak and could not. Others called out to Socrates to be serious, to propose a real alternative, to understand what was at stake. He understood perfectly what was at stake. That was the point. Under pressure from his friends, Plato himself, and others offered to pay, Socrates eventually proposed a fine of 30 minas. It was not nothing. It was real money. But it was not exile, and it was not silence, and the jury knew it. They voted on the penalty. 360 votes for death, 141 for the fine. More jurors voted for death and the penalty phase than had voted to convict him. His response to conviction, the Prytaneum proposal, the refusal to show remorse, the continued philosophical clarity that the jury may have experienced as contempt, had cost him approximately 80 votes. Men who had doubted his guilt became certain of the necessity of his removal. The death sentence was pronounced. Socrates received it. Then he did something that is, perhaps, the most remarkable thing in this entire remarkable day. He turned to the jurors who had voted to acquit him, the 221 men who had tried to save him, and he spoke to them quietly, not to the full court, to them. He told them not to be troubled. He told them that what had happened was, perhaps, for the best, that his divine sign had not intervened at any point during the day, and that its silence might mean that death was not the evil it appeared to be. He told them that no genuine harm could come to a good man in this life or whatever came after it, and that the gods would not abandon someone who had spent his life in their service. He told them that he bore no anger toward the men who had convicted him, that they had acted as they believed was right, and that he could not ask more of any man than that. Then he turned to the men who had voted to kill him, and told them, with a clarity that must have been difficult to hear, that they had not escaped judgment by silencing him, that others would come after him, that the voice of conscience could not be permanently voted down, that the only way to live free of the kind of examination Socrates had spent his life performing was to actually be good, and that this was harder than killing an old man, and could not be achieved by killing an old man. He was led away through the crowd that parted before him, some with hatred in their faces, some with grief, some with the particular expression of people who have done something they already know they will regret. Through the streets of the city he had never left, past the agora where he had spent 40 years, asking questions, to the prison near the southwest corner of the market. The sacred ship to Delos had left that morning, on its annual religious mission, a voyage during which, by Athenian law, no executions could be carried out. He would wait 30 days. His friends could visit. He could talk. He could think. He could do for 30 more days what he had always done. They locked the door. Outside, Athens went on. The market opened and closed. Speeches were made in the assembly. Ships came and went from Piraeus. The Parthenon stood on the Acropolis in the afternoon light, perfect and indifferent. Inside a stone room with a single barred window, an old man sat down and began to think. He had 30 days, and he had, by his own accounting, never been more certain that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. The city outside was going to regret this. Not immediately. Not in ways it could articulate or assign to any single moment of recognition. But the regret was already there, forming in the gap between what Athens told itself it was, a city of reason, of democracy, of the examined life, and what it had just done. In the full light of a spring morning, it would take a student named Plato to make that regret permanent, to write it down in words that would survive every empire and every catastrophe and every burning of every library for the next 2,500 years. But that is still to come. For now there is only the stone room, the single lamp, the old man, barefoot as always, sitting quietly in the growing dark, thinking. The door closed, and Athens went on. This is the thing that is hardest to hold in the mind, that on the afternoon Socrates was led to prison, the city did not stop. The market did not close. The assembly did not fall silent. The ships in Piraeus harbor continued loading and unloading their cargo with the indifferent efficiency of commerce that has no memory and no conscience. Children ran through the streets. Bread was baked. Arguments were had over the price of fish. The city that had just condemned its most honest citizen to death went home for dinner. Socrates, by all accounts, found this entirely reasonable. The prison was a low stone building near the southwest corner of the agora, close enough that on certain mornings, when the wind was right, you could hear the sounds of the market from inside the cell. The smell of bread. The particular noise of a city conducting its business. Socrates had spent 40 years in that market, had walked those stones barefoot in every season, had stopped at every corner to ask questions of whoever would stand still long enough to answer. Now he was on the other side of a wall from it, 30 days away from it. 30 days, and then something else entirely. The first morning, he woke before dawn, as he always did, lay still for a moment. In the unfamiliar dark, the stone walls, the chain on his ankle, the particular silence of a room with a locked door. Then he sat up, looked at the small rectangle of sky visible through the barred window, watched it change from black to gray to the first pale suggestion of blue. He would later tell his friends, slept extremely well. They did not know whether to find this admirable or maddening. They settled, as they usually did with Socrates, on both simultaneously. They came every day. This needs to be understood about the 30 days. They were not 30 days of solitary confinement, not 30 days of a man alone with his approaching death. The prison of Athens in 399 BC was not a modern institution designed for isolation. Friends could visit. They could stay for hours. They could bring food, though. Socrates ate sparingly and seemed indifferent to what was put in front of him, as he had always been indifferent to physical comfort. So they came every morning, gathering at the prison door before it opened, waiting with the particular patience of people who have nowhere more important to be. Crito, who was there first every day without exception, old, wealthy, loyal, still working the escape plan in the background with the stubborn hope of a man who cannot accept that his friend has made a decision. Phaedo, young and devastated, who would later write down everything he remembered with such fidelity that we can still hear the room. Simmias and Cebes from Thebes. Apollodorus, who wept so continuously and so openly that Socrates occasionally had to ask him to collect himself. Others, rotating through the circle of people whose lives had been shaped by this man and who were now spending the last of his days in his company. Plato came, sat in the corner, listened, spoke rarely, watched everything with the particular attention of someone who is already, without knowing it, beginning to write. And Socrates talked. Of course he talked. What else would Socrates do? The location had changed. The chain was new. The circumstances were, by ordinary standards, rather extreme. But the activity was the same. Activity it had always been, thinking out loud in company about things that mattered. On the third day, something unusual happened. Socrates asked for a lyre. His friends exchanged glances. In 40 years of knowing him, none of them had ever heard him express interest in music. Beyond the philosophical, he had discussed it often, as he discussed everything, but as a subject of examination rather than practice. He was not a musician. He had never, to anyone's knowledge, composed anything. He explained. He had been having a recurring dream, the same dream, visiting him throughout his life at intervals, always carrying the same message. A figure would come to him and say, "Socrates, make music and work at it." He had always interpreted this as referring to philosophy, that philosophy was the highest music, the proper harmony of the soul, and that his work in the agora was his obedience to the dream's instruction. But now, with time on his hands for the first time in his adult life, he had begun to wonder. Perhaps the dream meant something more literal. Perhaps he had been rationalizing. Perhaps the God wanted actual music, actual words, set to actual rhythm, and he had been substituting the thing he was already doing and calling it compliance. He did not want to die having misunderstood a divine instruction. So he asked for a lyre, and he composed a hymn to Apollo, the god of the oracle, who had set his life's course with a single answer, and some verse based on Aesop's fables, which he had always admired for the way they compressed large truths into small containers. His friends listened to him work through these compositions with the expression people wear when they are watching someone they love do something unexpected and touching. Socrates, who had spent his entire life examining poetry and finding it philosophically suspect, who had told poets to their faces that they did not understand their own work, was sitting in a prison cell writing poems with the careful, slightly puzzled concentration of a very intelligent man, doing something he was not naturally gifted at. He was not particularly good at it. He said so himself. But he finished the hymn and he finished the fable verses, and he set them aside with the satisfaction of a man who has done what was asked of him, however imperfectly. Cebes, watching this, asked him about poetry, about why he had never pursued it before, and the conversation that followed, about inspiration, about the relationship between rational inquiry and the kind of knowledge that comes from somewhere else entirely, about whether Socrates' daimonion and the poet's inspiration were perhaps the same thing encountered through different temperaments, lasted until the light through the barred window had moved from one wall to another, and the guards had changed shift twice. This was the 30 days. Not a vigil, not a countdown, a continuation, the same life compressed into a stone room, finding in its compression not diminishment, but a particular intensity. Every conversation mattered more because there were fewer of them left. Every question was asked with the urgency of people who understood that the man best equipped to help them think through it would not be available to them much longer. Socrates understood this too. He did not pretend otherwise, but he refused to let the urgency become grief, refused to let the approaching end color every present moment with the shadow of itself. He was here now, in this room, with these people. That was what was true. The other thing was still ahead, and he would deal with it when it arrived. He was, his friends would say later, the same man in prison that he had been in the agora. Exactly the same. The chain on his ankle did not humble him. The locked door did not frighten him. The approaching death did not make him sentimental or falsely profound or given to dramatic pronouncements about the meaning of his life. He asked questions. He examined answers. He pushed back when he disagreed. He laughed. This is recorded that he laughed in the prison more than once at things that struck him as genuinely funny. He ate what was brought to him. without complaint. He slept without apparent difficulty. He was entirely, stubbornly, completely himself. And this absolute consistency of character in the face of circumstances that break most people was perhaps the most powerful philosophical demonstration of his life. More powerful than any argument he had made in the Agora. More convincing than any dialogue Plato would later reconstruct. He had said for 40 years that the good man could not be harmed. That genuine harm was damage to the soul, to one's integrity, one's honesty, one's commitment to the examined life, and that external circumstances, however terrible, could not produce this damage without the person's own cooperation. Now he was proving it, not with words, with 30 days of living exactly as he had always lived, in a stone room, in chains, waiting to die. His friends watched him do this and were simultaneously comforted and devastated. Comforted because he was clearly all right, clearly, genuinely not suffering in any way they could identify. Devastated because his being all right made it impossible to argue that this was wrong, that he should fight it, that he should run. How do you save someone who does not need saving and knows it? Crito kept trying. Every morning, arriving first at the prison door, running through the plan in his head. One more time. The money was still there. The guards were still willing. The ship was still waiting. Every morning he sat beside his friend and looked for the opening, the moment of doubt, the flicker of fear, the human crack in the philosophical armor through which a practical argument might finally get through. Every morning, Socrates was fine. It was, Crito would later say, the most exhausting 30 days of his life. On the 15th day, Xantippe came alone. She came in the afternoon, after the main group of friends had left, deliberately. It seems, choosing a time when she would not have to sit in the company of the men who occupied her husband's final days so completely. She sat across from him in the stone room and looked at him for a long moment without speaking. He looked back at her with the same attention he gave everything. What passed between them in that conversation is not recorded. Plato was not there. Phaedo was not there. The people who preserved Socrates for posterity were not present for this particular exchange, which is perhaps as it should be. Some conversations belong only to the people having them. What we know is that she came back, most days after that. Sometimes with the children and sometimes alone. That the woman the sources remember as difficult as the shrewish wife, the impossible domestic burden that philosophical greatness had to endure, sat in a prison cell with her husband for 30 days and kept coming back. Draw your own conclusions about what that says about who she actually was. What we know of Socrates' inner life during those 30 days comes filtered through his friends who recorded what he said rather than what he felt. And Socrates characteristically said very little about what he felt. He examined feelings. He discussed them as philosophical phenomena. He did not perform them. But there are moments in the accounts that suggest the texture of his inner experience more directly than the philosophical discussions do. He spoke once, in the second week, about the daimonion, about the fact that his divine sign had not warned him away from any of it, not from The defense he gave, not from the penalty phase, not from the moments where a different choice might have produced a different outcome. He had come to understand this silence as meaningful, as the divine presence that had guided his entire life, declining to intervene, not because it had abandoned him, but because what was happening was, in some way, he could not fully articulate, right. His friends found this difficult to accept. If the daimonian had warned him away from trivial things, from taking certain roads, from certain conversations, why would it not warn him away from death? What kind of divine guidance permitted the death of the person it was guiding? Socrates sat with this question the way he sat with every question, without the need to resolve it immediately, without the discomfort of genuine uncertainty that most people experience and most people try to escape. He did not know why. He had some thoughts about why. He shared them carefully as possibilities, rather than conclusions. Perhaps, he said, death was not what they thought it was. Perhaps the daimonian knew something about what lay on the other side of it that made it less of an intervention to prevent, and more of a passage to permit. He did not know this. He could not know this. But the silence of the sign, which had never been wrong before, suggested to him that something was all right, that the direction he was moving in, however it looked from the outside, was not the wrong direction. He told this to his friends with the particular gentleness of someone who understands that what comforts him may not comfort them, that his equanimity about his own death is a gift to himself that becomes, for the people who love him, something closer to a wound. He knew they were suffering. He knew that his refusal to suffer was, in some paradoxical way, making it worse for them. A man in agony is easier to mourn than a man at peace. A man who rages against his sentence gives those who love him somewhere to put their own rage. Socrates gave them nothing to push against, and the grief had nowhere to go except inward. He was sorry for this. He said so once quietly to Phaedo, that he wished he could make it easier for them, and that he did not know how to do that without becoming someone other than himself, which would not actually help anyone. Phaedo did not know what to say to this. He recorded it anyway. 40 years later, when he told the story of those 30 days to the young man who would write it down as the dialogue called Phaedo, his voice apparently broke at this point. The young man noted this. He thought it was important. He was right. The days moved. The light through the barred window tracked its slow arc from morning to evening. The sounds of the agora came and went. The city lived its life on the other side of the wall. On the 22nd day, something happened that nobody had predicted. A man came to the prison who was not one of the regular visitors. An older man, a citizen of moderate means, who had been in the jury, who had voted to convict, who had in the penalty phase voted for death. He stood at the door of the cell and asked through the guard if Socrates would speak with him. Socrates said yes. Of course. The man came in and sat and looked at the floor for a long moment. Then he said that he had not slept well since the trial, that he had voted as he had voted because he had believed it was right, had believed the charges had believed that Socrates was genuinely dangerous to the city, had believed that the democracy was protecting itself from something real. He was no longer sure he had been right, not because anything had changed in his understanding of the facts, but because the man sitting before him, in a prison cell, chained and condemned, was so clearly not what the charges had described, was so clearly not a corrupter, not an impious schemer, not a threat to anything except the comfort of people who preferred not to think too carefully. He did not know why he had come. He said this. He did not know what he expected Socrates to say. He supposed he had come because he needed to look at him, to see whether the man in the cell was the man he had voted to kill. Socrates listened to all of this with complete attention. Then he asked the man a question. Did you vote as you believed was right? The man said yes. Then you did what a citizen should do, Socrates said. You cannot be blamed for that. The system asks you to judge, and you judged. The fact that I believe your judgment was mistaken does not make you a bad man. It makes you a man who made a mistake. We all make mistakes. The question is whether we examine them honestly afterward. The man looked at him. You are not angry, he said. It was not quite a question. No, Socrates said. Why not? Because anger would require me to believe that what happened to me was the worst thing that could happen. And I do not believe that. I believe the worst thing that can happen to a person is to live dishonestly, to know what is right, and do otherwise, to see clearly, and pretend to see nothing. That has not happened to me. Whatever else this is, it is not that. The man left after a while. The sources do not record his name. He walked back out into the agora and disappeared into the ordinary life of the city, carrying whatever he carried from that conversation. The 29th day came. Crito arrived before dawn, as he always did, sat beside his sleeping friend in the lamplight, waited. Socrates woke, saw Crito, was unsurprised, and the conversation that would determine everything began, the conversation about the laws, about the obligation of a citizen, about whether a man who had built his life on principle could abandon that principle in order to preserve his life. You already know how it ended. Crito ran out of arguments as dawn broke over Athens, sat in the growing light with his hands in his lap. An old man who had tried everything he knew how to try and had failed at the only thing that mattered to him that morning. And Socrates put his hand briefly on his friend's arm. A small gesture, a human gesture, the kind that does not appear in philosophical dialogues, because it cannot be transcribed into argument, the touch of one person reassuring another that despite everything, despite all of it, something is all right. Tomorrow the ship would arrive. Tomorrow the hemlock would be prepared. Tomorrow his friends would gather for the last time in this stone room. And the conversation that had lasted 40 years would find its final afternoon. But that was tomorrow. This morning there was still time. Still light coming through the barred window. Still the sounds of Athens waking on the other side of the wall. Still Crito beside him, and the lamp between them, and 30 days of living exactly as he had always lived. Exactly as he had always said a person should live, drawing to their close. in the only way they could have closed, and remained true to everything they had been. The city outside was waking. Inside the stone room, two old friends sat together in the last of the quiet, and did not speak, and did not need to. There are some silences that say everything. This was one of them. On the 29th night, Crito came before dawn. He was one of Socrates' oldest friends. They had known each other since childhood, grown up in the same demi, walked the same streets for 60 years. He was wealthy, quiet, loyal in the specific way that some people are loyal. The way that does not make speeches about loyalty but simply shows up. He had shown up. Every day of the 30 days. He showed up. Now, in the last darkness before the last morning, and sat beside his sleeping friend, and waited. Socrates woke without alarm. This is recorded, the detail of how he woke. Not with the start, not with the particular dislocation of someone who has forgotten where they are and then remembered. He opened his eyes and saw Crito sitting in the lamplight, and seemed entirely unsurprised, as if waking in a prison cell on the morning of your death. To find your oldest friend watching you was simply the next thing that was happening, and the next thing that was happening was fine. He asked Crito why he had come so early. Crito told him. The sacred ship from Delos had been sighted off the coast of Sunium the previous evening. It would reach Athens today, tomorrow at the latest, which meant that today was the last day, that the hemlock would be prepared today, that if Socrates was going to leave, and Crito had spent 30 days and a considerable amount of money arranging for him to leave, it had to be now. Everything was ready. The guards had been spoken to. Money had changed hands. Friends were waiting in Thessaly with a house and food and a life, a reduced life, an exiled life, but a life. Socrates would be safe. His family would be provided for. The plan was solid. All that was needed was for Socrates to stand up and walk out of this stone room, and keep walking. Crito leaned forward. His voice carried everything: 60 years of friendship, 30 days of desperate arrangement, the particular anguish of a man who has done everything in his power and is watching it not be enough. Please, he said, for us, if not for yourself. Socrates looked at him with the expression that everyone who knew him recognized, the one that meant he was about to examine something carefully, that the examination was going to go somewhere Crito did not want to go, and that it was going to go there regardless. He said, "Let us think about this together." And Crito, who had known him for 60 years, and knew exactly what "let us think about this together" meant, closed his eyes briefly, and then opened them. Because what else do you do when you love someone who is Socrates? Should I care what most people think? Socrates asked. You have always told me I should care about the opinion of the wise, not the many. Was that wrong? Crito said it was not wrong. Should I then do what the many want, flee, survive, give them the satisfaction of watching me choose life over principle, simply because the many will approve of it? Crito began to answer, and Socrates continued, gently, without cruelty, with the absolute focus of a man who has perhaps been preparing for this conversation his entire life. If I leave, he said, I wrong the city? I wrong the laws. And the laws, imagine them standing before me now, Crito, those great stone figures, asking me, Socrates, What wrong have we done? You. We brought you into existence. We raised you. We educated you. We gave you everything. You are. And you agreed to live within us. Not with words, but with 70 years of action, 70 years of staying in Athens. When you could have left, 70 years of choosing this city. Now, because the outcome of our processes has gone against you, you wish to destroy us. To tell every Athenian who has ever respected the law that laws only matter when they produce the verdict you wanted. To prove that Socrates, who argued all his life for justice and reason, will abandon both the moment justice costs him something. Crito was quiet. But the trial was unjust, he said finally. You were convicted unjustly. Yes, Socrates said. Probably. And if I had a way to appeal to a higher court, some authority above the laws of Athens, perhaps I would use it. But I do not. The only thing above the laws of Athens is the agreement I made by living within them. To accept their outcomes. Even this one. Even this one? Especially this one. Because the value of a principle is not tested when it is easy to uphold. It is tested precisely in moments like this. If I flee, I have spent 70 years arguing for justice and then abandoned it the first time it demanded something real from me. What would that make everything I said? Crito had no answer for this. He had come with a plan and money and 60 years of love, and none of it was sufficient against the particular precision of Socrates' thinking. This was, perhaps, the most painful version of a thing Crito had experienced many times. Being unable to argue with Socrates, not because Socrates was being clever or evasive, but because Socrates was simply right. There was a long silence in the stone room. Then Socrates said something that Plato records without comment, perhaps because no comment is adequate. He said that he seemed to hear the words of the laws in his ears like the sound of the flute in the ears of the initiated, that the sound of them made it impossible to hear anything else. He was not afraid. This is what makes the silence in that room so difficult to sit with. Across 2,500 years, not that Socrates was brave in the way soldiers are brave, forcing himself through fear by an act of will. He was not forcing himself through anything. He had thought about death for 40 years with the same careful honesty he had brought to every other question, and he had arrived at a place where it did not frighten him. He did not know what death was. He suspected it was either a dreamless sleep, which seemed restful, or a journey to another place where he could continue his conversations with the genuinely wise. Either possibility, he had concluded, was acceptable. What was not acceptable was becoming someone other than himself in order to avoid it. Crito sat with this for a long time. Then he nodded, the nod of a man who has lost an argument he desperately wanted to win, and knows it and loves the person who beat him anyway. I have nothing to say, Crito, he said. Let it be. Outside the barred window, Athens was turning gray and then gold with the first light. The Parthenon on the Acropolis caught it first, as it always did, that white marble going briefly pink, then gold, then settling into its characteristic blaze of reflected morning. The city was waking. The market was opening. People who did not know and people who knew and were trying not to think about it were beginning their ordinary day. Inside the stone room, two old friends sat in the growing light and did not speak. There was nothing left to say, and everything left to feel, and the morning was coming. Regardless. They came in the morning. All of them, or as many as could fit in the room that had been Socrates' world for 30 days. Plato was not there. He was ill, or said he was ill. The sources note his absence with a gentleness that suggests they understood it. Perhaps 28-year-old Plato, who would spend the rest of his long life writing about this day, could not be in the room where it actually happened. Perhaps the man who would preserve Socrates for eternity could not watch him die. The others came. Simmias and Cebes, who had traveled from Thebes. Phaedo, who was young, and would later describe the day in such detail that his account fills an entire dialogue and remains one of the most intimate records of a death in all of ancient literature. Crito, who had been there since before dawn. Others, whose names Phaedo remembers and records. A small crowd of people who loved the same man, and had come to spend whatever hours remained. Xantippe was there when they arrived. Socrates' wife, their youngest child in her arms. She had been there every day, Phaedo notes, and the sources that are usually unkind to her, that remember her as difficult, as quarrelsome, as not equal to her extraordinary husband, are quiet on this day. She simply wept. She said that this was the last time his friends would talk with him, and he with them. And Socrates asked Crito to have someone take her home. She went, crying aloud. The door closed behind her. Socrates looked at his friends. He had been in chains, the standard practice for condemned prisoners, and the chains had just been removed. In preparation for the day, he rubbed his leg, where the iron had been, with the ordinary physical relief of a man whose leg has been uncomfortable, and remarked, in the way that was entirely Socrates, the way that drove people to distraction and adoration in equal measure, that pleasure and pain were a curious thing, that they seemed to follow each other necessarily, that where one ended the other began. He had been thinking about writing a fable about this, he said, while he had been in prison. His friends looked at him. He looked back at them with that expression, the one that had illuminated 40 years of conversations in the agora. Then they began to talk. What they talked about on the last day of Socrates' life was the soul. Whether it survived death, whether the work of philosophy, the turning of the mind away from the body's demands and toward the pursuit of truth and wisdom, was preparation for something that came after, whether the arguments for immortality held up under the kind of careful examination Socrates had spent his life applying to everything. He did not claim to know. He was Socrates. He could not claim to know what he did not know, but he explored the arguments with genuine enthusiasm. The argument from opposites. That as sleep comes from waking and waking from sleep, perhaps life comes from death and death from life. The argument from recollection. That the ability of the mind to recognize perfect equality or perfect beauty, which does not exist in the physical world, suggests the soul carry knowledge from before its birth. The argument from affinity, that the soul, being invisible and unchanging and devoted to the eternal, is more akin to the eternal than to the mortal. His friends pushed back. Simmias and Cebes raised objections, real ones, the kind that required genuine thought to answer. The conversation moved the way it always moved, with Socrates, from question to answer to deeper question, each exchange clarifying something and opening something else, the truth being approached asymptotically, never fully reached but always closer. Phaedo, writing later, says that most of the people in the room had managed to hold themselves together through the philosophical discussion. The content absorbed them, gave them somewhere to put their attention. That was not the cup on the table in the corner. But when Socrates finished speaking about the soul, the grief came back. The room felt again what it was, a group of people in a prison cell, watching the afternoon light move on the stone walls, waiting. Socrates noticed. He had always noticed everything. He told them they were being foolish, not unkindly. Nothing he said that day was unkind, but directly. He told them that a philosopher should die well, and that dying well meant not making a scene of it. That he had sent Xantippe away partly for this reason, that the purpose of the day was not to demonstrate grief, which would accomplish nothing, but to think clearly about the questions that mattered most, which was the only way he knew to spend any day. Then he went to bathe. He bathed carefully, in a wooden basin brought to the cell, washing himself with the practical thoroughness of a man who does not want to leave unnecessary work for others. He explained this to his friends, that he did not want the women to have to wash his body after death. A small thing, a domestic kindness, the kind of detail that arrives unexpectedly in the historical record and makes a person 2,500 years gone suddenly, unbearably real. When he came back, the sun was lower. The light in the cell had changed. His children were brought to him, the two older sons and the youngest child, the one Xantippe had been carrying. He spoke to them. The sources do not record what he said. Some conversations are not recorded because the people who were present understood that they did not belong to history. The children left. The women of the household came and went. The friends remained. Then the prison official arrived. He was a middle-aged man who had been the official responsible for Socrates' imprisonment throughout the 30 days, and Phaedo records something remarkable about him. He liked Socrates, had come to talk with him whenever he could, considered him the finest and most gentle and most excellent man who had ever come to the prison. He came in now with the cup, and his face showed everything he could not say in his official capacity. He told Socrates he knew that others who came to this moment were angry with him for carrying out his duty. He told him he had found Socrates during this time to be the most noble man he had ever encountered. He told him he hoped the next part of Socrates' journey went well. Then he turned away and wept. Socrates thanked him genuinely, with the complete sincerity he brought to every exchange, from the greatest philosophical argument to the smallest human kindness. He said, "What a charming man." He took the cup. His friends collapsed. Phaedo describes it. Without apparent shame, he buried his own face in his cloak and wept for himself. He says, not for Socrates, for the loss of a companionship he would never find again. Crito had risen and walked to the corner, unable to watch. Apollodorus had been weeping throughout the day and now wept with a violence that affected everyone in the room. Socrates looked at them. He said, "What is this strange outcry? I sent the women away for this reason, so there would be no scene like this. I have heard that one should die in silence. Be quiet and have courage. They tried. He looked at the cup. He asked whether he could pour a libation from it, the traditional offering to the gods before any significant act. The official told him gently that only the correct amount had been prepared. Socrates nodded. Then he said that he could at least pray that his journey to the next world might go well. That this was his prayer. He raised the cup to his lips without hesitation, without trembling, without the pause that every person in that room was themselves experiencing on his behalf. The held breath, the last moment before the last moment. In one steady movement he drank it. His friends, who had been trying to hold themselves together at his request, stopped trying. Phaedo writes that when he saw this, he could no longer hold back his tears and they flowed freely. He buried his face again. He was not weeping for Socrates. He was weeping, he says, for his own misfortune in being deprived of such a companion. Socrates walked around, as the official had instructed, until his legs felt heavy. Then he lay down on his back. The official pressed his foot and asked if he could feel it. He could not. The cold was moving upward through his body steadily, the way the hemlock always worked, the limbs going first, the mind remaining clear until near the end. He lay still. The room was quiet except for the sound of men weeping. After some time, Socrates stirred. He turned his face slightly. He had covered it with his cloak, and uncovered it, and spoke. Crito, he said, we owe a rooster to Asclepius. See that it is paid. Do not neglect it. It was his last sentence. Crito said, it shall be done. Is there anything else? There was no answer. After a moment, the official lifted the cloak from Socrates' face. His eyes were fixed. Crito closed his eyes and his mouth. Phaedo ends his account simply. He says that of all the men of that time he had known, Socrates was the best, the wisest, and the most just. He was right. Outside the prison, Athens went on, the Agora, the Acropolis, the ships in Piraeus harbor, the assembly on the Nix hill. The whole machinery of the city that had decided it could not live with this man in it. What Athens did not know, and could not know, was that it had just made Socrates immortal. That the men in that room, the ones with their faces buried in their cloaks, the ones who could not watch, the ones who would spend the rest of their lives trying to answer the question of what to do with everything he had given them, would take his words and build from them something that would last longer than Athens, longer than Greece, longer than any empire that came after. The stone room is empty now. The lamp has burned out. But the conversation never ended. It is happening right now, in every place where someone asks a question they do not already know the answer to and refuses to stop until they find it. In every courtroom where the truth is spoken to power at personal cost. In every moment when a person chooses consistency over comfort, principle over survival, the examined life over the easier thing. It is happening right now. Socrates is still talking. He never stopped. Athens regretted it almost immediately. Not officially. Not in the way that cities officially reverse decisions. No decree was passed, no monument erected in apology. But the ancient sources record something that functions as collective remorse expressed in the specific way that cities express remorse when they cannot bring themselves to admit it directly. Meletus, the young poet who had brought the charges, was prosecuted shortly after. For what, exactly, the sources do not entirely agree, but the prosecution happened and it did not go well for him. Anytus, the democratic politician whose conviction and organizational ability had driven the case to its conclusion, fell out of public favor with a speed that suggests the city knew, on some level, what it had done. The sources say he was pelted in the street, driven from Athens, that he spent his remaining years in a diminishment that felt, to those watching, like a verdict being revised. These are probably legends, or at least embellishments. History is full of satisfying stories about the punishment of those who punish the innocent, and they should be treated with the same careful skepticism Socrates applied to everything. But the impulse that generated the stories is real. Athens wanted, very quickly, to be on the right side of what had happened. And it was not on the right side. And there was nothing it could do about that. Except remember. That task fell to a young man who had not been in the courtroom, who had been ill, or said he was ill, the distinction perhaps not mattering, since the illness of grief is as real as any other kind, who had spent 30 days visiting the prison, listening to every conversation, watching the man he loved most in the world think his way through the approach of death with the same careful precision he had brought to every other question. Plato was 20 years old when Socrates died. He had come from a family of distinguished Athenian aristocrats, the kind of family that expected its sons to go into politics, to serve in the assembly, to participate in the governance of the city, in the ways that distinguished men were expected to participate. He had been moving toward that life when he encountered Socrates. After Socrates, politics was impossible. Not because Socrates had made him cynical about politics, though the trial had certainly contributed to a deep skepticism about democracy's capacity to recognize truth, but because Socrates had shown him something more important than politics, had shown him that the questions underneath politics, what is justice, what is the good life, what should a city be, were the real questions, and that no one had answered them, and that answering them was the work that actually mattered. Plato left Athens after the execution. He traveled to Megara, to Egypt, to southern Italy, where communities of philosophers influenced by Pythagoras were pursuing their own investigations into mathematics and the soul. He was away for perhaps 12 years. When he returned to Athens, he was 40 years old, and he knew what he was going to do with his life. He was going to write down Socrates. All of it. Every conversation he could reconstruct from memory and from the accounts of others who had been present. The early dialogues, Euthyphro, Apology, Crito, Phaedo, dealing with the trial and death. The middle dialogues, Meno, Symposium, Phaedrus, Republic, in which Socrates' method is applied to the largest questions philosophy can ask. The late dialogues, in which Plato's own thinking begins to move beyond his teacher, developing positions that Socrates might have examined skeptically, but that his student found unavoidable. He wrote 35 dialogues. They all survived in the entire history of ancient Greek philosophy. no comparable body of work from any other thinker, survived intact. The works of the pre-Socratics, Heraclitus, Parmenides, Democritus, survive only in fragments quoted by later authors. Most of what Aristotle wrote was lost. The works of the Stoics, the Epicureans, the Skeptics, fragments, summaries, second-hand reports. Plato survives complete. Every word. As if the tradition understood that these particular documents could not be allowed to disappear. He also founded a school, around 387 BC, in an olive grove outside Athens' walls sacred to the hero Academus. Plato established a community of philosophical inquiry that would operate continuously for 900 years, until the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed it in 529 AD as a pagan institution incompatible with Christian rule. 900 years. Longer than the Roman Empire in the West. Longer than most nations that have ever existed. He called it the Academy. The word has not left us since. Into this academy, around 367 BC, came a 17-year-old from Macedonia named Aristotle, the son of a physician trained from childhood in the observation of natural phenomena with the practical precision of the medical tradition, as different from Plato in temperament and method as it was possible for two brilliant people to be, while sharing fundamental commitments. Where Plato looked upward, toward the eternal forms, the perfect abstract realities of which the physical world was only a shadow, Aristotle looked outward, at the physical world itself, at the organisms and the stars and the weather, and the political arrangements of actual cities. He wanted to understand what was there, what could be observed, what could be classified, and analyzed and known through systematic investigation. He stayed at the academy for 20 years. He was Plato's best student, and eventually his most important critic. When Plato died in 347 BC and the academy's leadership passed to someone other than Aristotle, a decision whose reasons are still debated, Aristotle left. He went to Asia Minor, then to Macedonia, where he tutored a 13-year-old prince named Alexander for 3 years. The prince became Alexander the Great. The tutor became Aristotle, who returned to Athens in 335 BC and founded his own school, the Lyceum, where he taught while walking, giving the peripatetic tradition its name, and spent the next 12 years producing the body of work that would organize human knowledge for the next 2,000 years. Logic, biology, physics, metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric, poetics. He wrote on all of it with a systematic thoroughness that has never been replicated by a single mind, before or since. He invented formal logic, the syllogism, the basic structure of valid argument, essentially from nothing, and his invention was so complete that it was not substantially improved upon until the 19th century. He classified living organisms in ways that remained the foundation of biology for 2,000 years. He described the orbits of the planets with errors that would persist until Copernicus. He developed an ethics based not on abstract forms but on the observation of what actually makes human beings flourish, an approach so practically grounded and so sophisticated that it is still being actively debated in philosophy departments today. None of this would have existed without Socrates. Not because Socrates taught any of it, he taught almost nothing in the sense of transmitting specific content, but Because Socrates demonstrated, with his whole life and his death, that the examined question was worth more than the comfortable answer, that the honest acknowledgement of ignorance was the beginning of wisdom, that the pursuit of truth was worth more than the appearance of knowledge. Plato built from that. Aristotle built from Plato. And from Aristotle, directly, continuously, through the Islamic scholars, who preserved and extended his work during Europe's dark ages, through the medieval universities that were built on his logic, through the Renaissance thinkers who rediscovered Plato and wept at the beauty of it, the entire tradition of Western philosophy and science descends. All of it, ultimately, from a barefoot man in an Athenian marketplace, asking questions. The conversation did not stay in Athens. It could not be contained there, could not be contained anywhere, which is perhaps what Socrates meant when he told the jury that silencing him would not silence the questions, that the voice of honest inquiry was not a voice that could be locked in a stone room, or stopped with a cup of hemlock, or voted down by 500 men who had decided they had heard enough. He was right, as he usually was, about the things that mattered. The dialogues traveled first through the Greek world, copied by hand, carried by students and merchants and travelers, read in Alexandria and Antioch and Rome, translated into Latin by Cicero, who found in them a model of philosophical inquiry that he spent his own life trying to equal. The Roman tradition of philosophy is, in large part, an attempt to bring Socratic thinking into Latin, to make the questions available to a world that did not read Greek. When Rome fell and the Western world entered its long, painful reorganization, the dialogues survived in the East. Constantinople kept them. The Byzantine scholars who maintained the tradition of Greek learning through the centuries when Western Europe had neither the stability nor the literacy to engage with it, they kept Plato, copied him, argued about him, incorporated him, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes brilliantly, into their theological thinking. St. Augustine, in the 4th century AD, read Plato in a Latin translation and found, in the theory of the forms, the idea of perfect, eternal realities of which the physical world is a shadow, something that seemed to him to illuminate the Christian God, the eternal and unchanging, and perfectly real source of everything that exists. Plato had not been thinking about the Christian God, but Augustine was, and the synthesis he built between Platonic philosophy and Christian theology would shape Western thought for 1,000 years. Aquinas, in the 13th century, did the same with Aristotle. The recovery of Aristotle's works from the Islamic world, where they had been preserved and extended and commented upon by thinkers like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, while European monasteries were struggling to maintain basic literacy, produced a revolution in European philosophy. Aquinas built from Aristotle a systematic theology of such comprehensive ambition that it became, for centuries, the official intellectual framework of the Catholic Church. The university system that grew up in medieval Europe, Bologna, Paris, Oxford, Cambridge, was built on the study of Aristotelian logic. Every student who learned to construct a valid argument, to identify a fallacy, to distinguish between what was known and what was merely believed, was working within a framework that Aristotle had built in the Lyceum in Athens, from methods he had learned from Plato, from questions first asked by a barefoot man, who was dead before Aristotle was born. The Renaissance rediscovered Plato directly, when Greek scholars fled Constantinople. After its fall to the Ottomans in 1453, they brought manuscripts with them to Italy. The Platonic Academy in Florence, founded by Cosimo de' Medici for the scholar Ficino, to translate and teach the dialogues, produced a wave of Platonic enthusiasm that swept through Renaissance intellectual life and contributed to the transformation of European art and science that we call the rebirth of learning. Michelangelo read Plato. Leonardo read Plato. The idea of the artist as someone who perceives and expresses eternal forms beyond the visible world, the idea that great art reaches toward truth rather than merely depicting appearances. This is a Platonic idea. It shaped the way the Renaissance understood what art was for. The Enlightenment returned to Socrates directly. The philosophers of the 18th century, Voltaire, Rousseau, the men who built the intellectual foundations of modern democracy, found in the trial and death of Socrates a story that spoke directly to their situation. A man destroyed by institutional power for the crime of honest thought. A demonstration that authority and truth were not the same thing. That the obligation to think clearly was more fundamental than the obligation to obey. In 1787, the French painter Jacques Louis David produced The Death of Socrates, one of the most famous paintings in Western art. It shows the moment of the hemlock, with a classical clarity and moral gravity that made it immediately understood as an allegory for the present. 2 years later, the French Revolution began. The connection is not direct. History is never that simple. But the image of a man who chose death over the surrender of his convictions, who faced institutional power with the only weapons available to him, reason and honesty, and the refusal to pretend, was in the air of a Europe that was beginning to ask whether kings and priests had the authority they claimed. The question Socrates had asked, who has the right to tell you what to think, and what do you owe them when you disagree, was still alive, still dangerous, still requiring of those who asked it more than they might have expected to give. It is still alive now. Every courtroom where a person speaks the truth at personal cost. Every classroom where a student is taught to examine an argument rather than simply accept it. Every moment when a human mind chooses the difficult, honest answer over the easy, comfortable one. Every institution that has built into its structure the assumption that questions should be welcomed, that certainty should be tested, that no one's authority exempts them from the demand to explain themselves. All of it carries, however faintly, the fingerprint of a man who died in a stone room in Athens in 399 BC, having spent his last day arguing about the soul with people who loved him and were weeping while he talked. He did not write anything down. This is the final remarkable fact about Socrates. The man who changed the history of human thought did it entirely through conversation, through presence, through the particular quality of attention he brought to every exchange, which made the person he was talking to feel that the question they were exploring together was the most important thing in the world, because he believed it was. Whatever question you were honestly examining, whatever gap between what you thought you knew and what you actually knew you were trying to close, that was the most important thing. Not because the question was great, but because the honesty was. Because the willingness to not know, to sit in genuine uncertainty and keep looking, was the closest thing to wisdom that a human being could reach. The Parthenon has been in ruins for centuries. The democracy that built it and killed Socrates is gone. The empire that replaced it is gone. The empires that replaced that empire are gone. The language Socrates spoke is no longer anyone's mother tongue. The city that convicted him has been conquered and rebuilt and conquered again and has grown and shrunk and grown again into the modern metropolis that sits now around the hill where the Parthenon still stands, damaged and enduring in the Greek light. And Socrates is still talking in the dialogues that Plato wrote and that have never stopped being read, in the philosophical tradition that runs from the academy through the lyceum, through the medieval universities, through the Enlightenment, through the modern discipline of philosophy that still asks the same questions he was asking in the agora, in every version of the Socratic method being used in law schools and medical schools and elementary school classrooms right now, today, in every language on earth, in every person who has ever paused before a confident assumption and thought, but wait, do I actually know this? Is this something I know, or something I believe, or something I was told and accepted without examination? That pause, that moment of honest uncertainty, that is Socrates. That is what he gave the world, and what the world has never been able to give back or get rid of, and what it would be immeasurably poorer without. The night is quiet. Athens sleeps beneath the Acropolis as it has slept for 3,000 years, differently each century, with different fears and different hopes, speaking different languages, worshipping in different ways, but sleeping under the same stars and the same hill. The Parthenon catches the moonlight. Somewhere in the city, right now, a person is reading a book, or having a conversation, or lying awake with a question they cannot answer and cannot stop asking. They do not know his name, maybe, or they know his name but do not know that what they are doing is what he spent his life doing, is what he died rather than stop doing, is the thing he gave everything for, in a stone room, on a spring afternoon, in the year 399 BC. But it is. The conversation continues. It always does. It always will.